the 12 steps in their own right they are some sort of initiatory path, and initiations are typically heeded and responded to when a specific individual is prepared for that moment. And in this idea that we need to revision to some extent what recovery is, as well as our understanding of addiction, we have to come to understand too that maybe one of the problems that's gotten us there is the amount of people that have been forced to participate in that initiatory experience of the 12 steps before they really wanted to, or before they were in a position where they were really willing to do that. And as a result, it's sort of slowly drained the initiatory path of something special and sacred and powerful. And I think we see that with the evolution of people being forced to do 12 steps via court, people being forced to go to AA without any desire to really go and participate, people participating in treatment programs of some sort and having really no desire to go through that path, but then being just sort of made to. And I think that greatly sort of diminishes the individual's ability to get better in that or through that path, because it doesn't work for them. But it's not that it doesn't work, it's that they weren't ready for it. But at the same time, the more and more people that go through that experience, the more and more the 12 steps themselves sort of lose something. I think that it's been diluted by people that don't want to be there and people that don't want to do it, but also to some extent that it's just sort of this cornerstone of, well, if you're a drug addict or you're an alcoholic, you go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I guess there's this potential that in itself needs to remain transient. It needs to be able to move. It needs to be able to sort of continuously evolve, so that there are other options for people, and particularly maybe options that are of greater depth or somewhat new, somewhat refreshing, you know. And I think that's even the point of sort of this ongoing idea that reimagining addiction, it opens up an immense amount of taboos. I mean, you're going to challenge a lot of people's thoughts around what does it mean to be someone who's recovered? What does the idea of recovered really mean? What does it mean to be in recovery? And when you open those questions up, you never get one answer. And so that's part of the problem, is that this collective unit is supposed to be all in agreement about something, but really no one's necessarily in agreement besides one thing, which is you don't use drugs, you don't drink. But then it just becomes this matter of, well, everyone decides on their own terms what the idea of recovery really is. What's the essence of recovery? And I think that one of the biggest things that maybe is missing is story. You know, so we talk about stories of 6,000 years old or whatever. We talk about these stories from Old Testament or the Bible. We talk about myths, and we talk about them thousands of years later. Well, why? It's because story is immensely impactful because of some sort of archetypal quality that it bears. And so everyone's experience in addiction is bearing the same sort of quality if they can come to understand it. You know, it is not some sort of meaningless thing that happened to me. And I think with the medical model and the disease model, we have no ability to see that. And so we're stuck in logos, we're stuck in rationale, we're stuck in science, we're stuck in the brain. And although Alcoholics Anonymous is famous for providing a spiritual solution, we don't look at, it's hard to say that we look at it as a spiritual problem. You know, there are ideas of emptiness or some sort of void within. People refer to it as a spiritual malady or a spiritual sickness, but really trying to understand what story am I a part of. And so one of the ways that, you know, you could think about this is that sort of the etiology of addiction, you could think about it through two specific myths, Greek myths, and you could think about it through Dionysus, the goddess of Dionysus, and Prometheus. And Prometheus is really famous for this. What he does is he steals fire from the gods and he gives it to the mortals. He gives something that only the gods were able to have, and he gives it to the regular people. And as a result of this, Zeus chains him up to a wall, and his punishment, his consequence for this theft is to have his liver pecked at every day by an eagle for the entire day. And then the eagle will fly away at night, and he will experience some sense of relief or some sense of rest, only to wake up and suffer again all day, and then go to sleep and get some sense of relief and some sense of rest. That's really equivalent to the experience of active addiction. You spend your whole day looking to cop or suffering or fighting with people or trying to find your money, and it's the similar to something just pecking at you all day. And then you finally get it, and for a really short period of time, you get some sense of relief and you get some rest, and you wake up and you do it all over again. And so drug addicts and alcoholics are to some extent carrying forth this sort of archetypal punishment, right? We are experiencing the same thing that Prometheus had to experience. It's also super interesting if you think about it. A, it's the liver. B, alcoholism and the liver. But also the liver has the ability to regenerate and heal itself. And so it's also this underlying tone that there's something about, well, this can be solved. And so we're in this sort of, we experience this archetypal punishment. Well, what did we steal? What kind of theft have I participated in? And really from the addict or the alcoholic standpoint, we've participated in stealing ecstasy. And now ecstasy was something of a joy, and it was bestowed upon people as a result of having earned it, as a result of having deserved it. It was a special moment. You experienced joy. It was a blissful experience, and then it disappeared. Well, you can think about it. I mean, the drug addicts and the alcoholic's plight is that they want to feel that sense of ecstasy all the time. So that is what, on an archetypal level, I've stolen from the gods. So I've committed this theft. That's this sort of Dionysian aspect to it. And now I'm suffering this Promethean punishment. And so I think it's interesting that if people could come to terms with understanding that their addiction is part of a greater story, then recovery becomes a part of a greater story as well. And I think uncovering that story is really what the process of recovery needs to become, versus not only becoming like an upright member of society and sort of righting your wrongs and acknowledging the way you've treated people, but also what place does my addiction play in my greater existence on this earth? Why did it happen to me and not somebody else? Why did this group of people become drug addicts and not somebody else? There's meaning in that. And I think that if we continuously look at addiction as a brain disease, or in logos and science and rationale, and we can't find our way into the mythos, if we can't find our way into this sort of mythopoetic approach to understanding the problem, then nothing really changes. No matter how much recovery can progress, no matter how much treatment is out there, we need to have new ideas. We need to have fresh thinking. We need to bring, clear eyes to something that's been around for so long. If you think about it, how many people might be more engaged in trying to get into recovery if the way that they understood the problem was totally different? And I think that's a huge piece. I also think, if you think about it, if you think mythologically, drug addicts and alcoholics tend to be highly creative people, right? So when people who suffer from addiction or alcoholism end up in recovery, they end up being able to bring something new through their experience into the collective and into the world. Another way to look at it from the mythological stance is that we're somehow in a battle with the god Kronos. And Kronos, in time, through his evolution, becomes the god of Saturn in the Roman tradition. But in the Greek, the god Kronos, what he would do is he would eat his children in order to sort of calcify their growth so that he can never become overthrown. What's interesting about the god Kronos is we get the word chronic from Kronos. And so that's really interesting in relation to the medical model or the disease model, which wants to say it's a chronic disease. And if something is a chronic disease, that means you're going to deal with it for the rest of your life. And in such a way, thinking like that is the same way of it's essentially the God Chronos eating the creative people on this earth to make sure that they don't bring something new into the collective. So we believe that it's chronic, we're never going to get better, and that sort of stunts our individual growth or our essence or people fulfilling their destiny. If you think about it like that, recovery really becomes, okay, now I'm a part of this archetypal battle to free myself from this God Chronos. So becoming recovered in some sense is to free yourself from this story and sort of live out your own destiny, your own unique potential that you have, and not letting the addiction become something that holds you back. You know, I think one of the things that people originally in AA believed is that alcoholism could be cured, drug addiction could be cured. That's a huge taboo. You can't say that. And if you do, you're putting people's lives at risk. And, you know, to some extent, I understand where that's coming from. But if you keep them sick, that's killing them. Because there could be something of a great potential in that individual. Now, that doesn't mean that people should get sober and then go use drugs, right? But it also means that we have to start taking into consideration, well, no one wants to ask this question, well, why does it work for this person but it doesn't work for that person? No one wants to ask, what did that person do that kept them sober, but that person did the exact same thing and they relapsed? And there's always some sort of comment you come back to or some sort of thought. If we can wrestle with those questions, that's the experience of Jacob in the Bible. That's that contending. That's, you know, Jacob, you know, steals his brother's birthright, another theft, archetypally in these stories. And, you know, he has a dream or a vision and he finds himself wrestling with an angel. And as he wrestles with the angel and he wins, he actually becomes transformed. And so as a result of his contention with this being and winning, his name gets changed and he becomes Israel, the one who wrestles with God. And so that's to say that if we can't contend with difficult questions around addiction and recovery, and we can't sort of wrestle with things that no one wants to touch, then we will never actually grow and progress how we look at the problem, how we work with the problem, how we understand the problem. And I think that we're at a pretty pivotal point where addiction is not going away, recovery numbers are dismal, and if we can't start to willingly have that wrestling match with our group, with our collective, with our friends in the community, with treatment, we'll remain stuck. And that's sort of what Chronos wants. Just stay there. You're all sick and you're never getting better. I don't think these guys who thought that alcoholism could be cured meant that you would then be immune to alcoholism. Meaning, you know, you could live your life free of having to worry about this problem. And that's sort of the message of the 12 steps. But I think it's interesting that how many people really take that as far as they could go? What does freedom really mean? If I become recovered, what am I really saying I've accomplished? You know, that's part of the question, is what does that mean? It doesn't become this meaningless suffering that you went through. It actually becomes a part of your story. You know, that's all we have at the end of the day is our story. Who we are and how our life is and how we see it and where it's taken us and what we've added to the people around us. That's the story of me. And addiction is just a part of that story. You know, you said something interesting about risk, right? That's something that's inherently missing in the recovery collective, I think, because it's a risk to have conversations that challenge the norm. And, you know, people who are so fundamentalist about the 12 steps, if they, I guess, my perspective at least, my outlook on it is that if you understood the third step to its true nature, then taking a risk as such is exactly what it's asking you to do, because it's saying challenge the old belief system, even if it helped you. I'm not saying it didn't help and it doesn't help, but challenge it when it stops working, and take that risk that you'll be okay because you've made a commitment and devoted your life to a higher power or to God, and you really believe that because that's what you tell other people. The third step becomes really embodied after you've been in recovery for a period of time and you've hit that wall and you've reached that resistance and you take that risk to step outside. That's really the third step, because now you're really being guided by this part of yourself, or a power beyond yourself, and you're trusting in it. That's the risk. And a lot of people in recovery, I just feel like, personally, they just get comfortable, and it becomes about the accolades. Well, I've done this, and I've accomplished this, and I've done this, and that's great. But on a spiritual level, on a deeper level of depth and understanding, if you step beyond your comfort and risk that, that's where you really get to the gold. You have to confront the dragon in your life to get to the treasure. And so getting sober and experiencing recovery for a period of time, it's just a tease if you look at it in one way. There's so much more. And so part of the issue is, how do we get people to understand that? And then so how do you get people to in some sense really take that risk? Because again, the person who is preaching that or talking about that is a potential danger, because it's trying to break someone out of their comfort and break someone out of their norm and to challenge something. But again, you bring it back to that story of Jacob. It's in the wrestling that something happens, not in the hiding or not in the comfort. It's in the challenge that something happens. And in recovery, it's to say, it's not to say you didn't accomplish something tremendous by getting sober. It's a tremendous accomplishment, to get sober, and even to experience recovery or to call yourself recovered. It's a tremendous accomplishment. But there is more. There is more, and it just really comes back to Bill saying himself that AA was a spiritual kindergarten. The whole purpose is to utilize it as a springboard to enter into the spiritual life. And then as you develop the senses of being able to sort of work with the spiritual world, your experience of life in the physical world really starts to deepen and become something extremely alive. Your experience of the world becomes alive. And in some extent, you could say that's what drug addicts are looking for. That's what alcoholics are looking for. Is life to feel like something that they're actually a part of and that's participating with them. And that's the thing about recovery. It's a participatory event. The more I'm participating with recovery, whatever the spirit of recovery is participates back with me. And the more I develop my sort of whatever I guess I'd call sort of spiritual sensibilities, the more that thing which is recovery I can really experience as sort of a companion, not just an achievement. I think it's even more so to say that recovery itself is a springboard, not just sobriety. Even the experience of getting into recovery, that's just the beginning. But I guess I think some part of the new message, or some piece of the new message, is that you don't have to identify as an addict for the rest of your life, because that holds you back. In some sense, that holds you back. That's Chronos. That holds you back.